Hey Bullets YouTube channel.
Hurry up, now tell us why you're here.
Green Bean Carafine has been fired from Sebastian Racing. And now into the starting grid where Jackson Storm starts at pole position again with Green Bean Carafine, who's outside. Row 2 has Ed Trunken and H.J. Hollis. I wonder if they'll lead in the laps this race. Row 3 has Bubba Wheelhouse starting in 5th, the same position as last week, and Aaron Clockert, who's outside. Row 4 has Ryan Inside Laney and Pitbull Speed Racer to his outside. I wonder how well he'll do this race. Row 5 has Richie Gunzit and Jim Reverick, who will hopefully have a better race than last week. Row 6 has J.D. McPillar and Harvey Rodcap. I wonder how they'll do. And row number 7 has J.P. Drive, Apples Racer, and Dan Garcia, who's outside. Row 8 has Nick Shift, the number 93, who replaced Ernie Gearson, and Tim Treadless. Row 9 has the defending champion, Lightning McQueen, and Greg People, who has not qualified in a little while. Row 10 has Bobby Swift, another Piston Cup champion, and Barry DePedal, who's outside. Row 11 has another Piston Cup champion, Cal Weathers, with Jimmy Cables, the car currently 4th in points, who's outside. Row 12 has Ricky Axel and Chip Gearings. I wonder if they'll do well this race. And row 13 has Brick Yardley and Arthur Carstro, who did really well in practice. Row 14 has Darren Ledfoot, who thinks he's going to lead some laps this race, and James Garrison, who's outside. Row 15 has Jamarcus K. Cart and Ralph Carlo, both hoping to have a good race this race. And row 16 has Reb Meeker and Morey Clutchburn, both of whom are disappointed by their qualification results. Row 17 has Rev Rodages and Paunchy Wipeout starting in 34th, the same position as last week. Row 18 has Sebastian Silva and Alex Bloman to his outside. Row 19 has Dino Draftski and Tony Gasworth back after a crash. Row 20 has Brian Sparks and Cal Williams, who is also back to qualifying. Row 21 has Michael McDrivewell and Aaron Breakwheel, both making their first start this season. And starting in 43rd is Ryan Thunderbolt Jr., only barely beating Buck Beeringly and these 12 of the cars to qualify for this race. Todd Marcus, Lane Locke, Tommy Highbanks, Terry Cargis, and Dirksen Augustino, who all failed to qualify for this race, were fired by their teams and also retired from Piston Cup racing. Frank Vermerson, who also failed to qualify, retired from Piston Cup racing. And here is Buck Beeringly. Good job, Vuzine, for not firing him! Jackson Storm would lead the field to the green flag, but shortly after, Green Bean Carafine would take the lead. He would lead for a few yards before Jackson Storm would retake the lead, leading all the way until lap 29, where Greg People would somehow take the lead. He would only lead for 10 yards because Jackson Storm would take the lead again, leading all the way until lap 64, where Pitbull Speed Racer would take the lead and lead the field into lap 65. But just before turn 1, Lightning McQueen would take the lead. But soon after taking the lead, Lightning McQueen would lose the lead to H.J. Hollis, who would lead the field until turn 3, where Bobby Swift would take the lead. He would lose the lead shortly before lap 66 because Jackson Storm would retake the lead, leading until lap 99, where Brian Sparks would be 23rd as of lap 89, where he accidentally wrecks Lightning McQueen, Cal Weathers, Arthur Carstro, Morey Clutchburn, Dino Draftski, Aaron Breakwheel, Rev Rodages, and himself. I feel bad for everyone in the crash. And Tony Gasworth would take the lead on lap 99, but then quickly lose it to Jackson Storm, who would lead until lap 100, where he would lose the lead to Jim Reverick, leading his very first lap in the Piston Cup. But then Jackson Storm would retake the lead, leading all the way until lap 148, where Paunchy Wipeout would be 25th as of lap 148, where he accidentally wrecks Bobby Swift, Tony Gasworth, Ryan Thunderbolt Jr., Ricky Axel, Jimmy Cables, Ralph Carlo, Brick Yardley, and himself. I feel bad for everyone. And Bubba Wheelhouse would take the lead after the restart and lead until lap 151, where Jackson Storm would obviously take the lead. 10 laps later, on lap 161, Apple would say this to JP Drive, who would then bump Jackson Storm on lap 161 and then run to take the lead on lap 161. But later that lap, Darren Leadfoot would take the lead. He would lead until lap 178, where he'd lose the lead to H.J. Hollis, who would lead the field until lap 179. But Darren Leadfoot would retake the lead and lead for 20 laps before James Garrison would take the lead off of pit cycles on lap 199. But after the pit stops were done, JP Drive would take the lead. He would lead until lap 201, where he'd lose the lead to JD McPillar, who would lead for 8 laps. And during those 8 laps, from lap 203 until lap 207, Garrison Motorsports had the entire top 5 to themselves. But on lap 209, Ed Trunken would take the lead. He would only lead for 100 yards because JP Drive would retake the lead, leading until lap 216, where he'd lose the lead to Ryan Inside Laney, who would lead for 2 laps before losing the lead to Green Bean Carafine, retaking the lead. He would lead until lap 221, where he'd lose the lead to Pitbull Speed Racer, who would lead for 4 laps before losing the lead to his teammate, J.D. McPillar, who would retake the lead and lead until lap 232, but then lose the lead to Darren Leadfoot, who would lead all the way until lap 281 for 49 laps. Darren Leadfoot! I know that leading 49 laps sounds perfectly normal, but you're racing against next generation racers as a stock car who is not Lightning McQueen. How are you doing this? But it was too good to be true, because on lap 281, Darren Leadfoot would be out because he ran out of fuel and had an engine failure. I feel bad for Darren Leadfoot. He had a chance to take a surprise win from the next generation racers. JP Drive, a next generation racer, would take the lead after the restart on lap 282, but on lap 304, Aaron Clocker would take the lead. He would only lead for about 15 yards before Jim Reverick would lead his second Piston Cup lap, but later on lap 304, Pitbull Speed Racer would take the lead, leading until lap 305, where Jackson Storm is now back in the lead after a little while of not leading. And 50 laps later, he would lose the lead to H.J. Hollis, who would lead until lap 364. But then, Jackson Storm would retake the lead on lap 364 and lead for 26 laps before Barry DePedal would fail to wreck Jackson Storm on lap 386. J.D. McPillar, seeing an opportunity, takes the lead on lap 386 and leads for 2 laps before Jackson Storm would retake the lead again and lead the final 12 laps to win the 2016 Gasprin 400. J.D. McPillar would finish second this race, Bubba Wheelhouse would finish third, Ed Trunken fourth, Pitbull Speed Racers 5th, Green Bean Carfine 6th, Jim Reverick 7th, JP Drive 8th, Aaron Clocker 9th, and rounding out the top 10 is Tim Treadless. Reb Meeker would be the last car to finish on the lead lap this race, finishing 26th. Now here is the full race results. I already went over the top 10, with Jim Reverick actually doing well, unlike his first 2 races. James Garrison is the highest finishing stock car this race, finishing 11th, with Jamarcus K. Cart, his teammate, finishing 12th ahead of H.J. Hollis, and Ryan Inside Laney, who both led laps, and Greg People rounds out the top 15, just barely beating Chip Gearings. Sebastian Silva finishes 17th. Harvey Rodcap beat Barry DePedal by less than 1/10,000th of a second. And Michael McDrivewell rounds out the top 20. Nick Shift earns 100 points in 21st. Dan Garcia, Cal Williams, Alex Bloman, and Richie Gunzit finish in the top 25, with Reb Meeker rounding out the cars to finish on the lead lap. Darren Leadfoot, due to his engine failure, finishes 27th. And behind him are all of the cars who wrecked out early in the race. I feel bad for all of them because they couldn't even finish the race. Lightning McQueen gets his second DNF of the season, but still led 1 lap this race. But I feel bad for Brian Sparks. He's the car that will be finishing 43rd this race, but at least he qualified. And here is the top 20 in points, where the gap between Lightning McQueen and most of his competitors behind him has gotten smaller due to Lightning McQueen failing to finish the race. Top 5 is still the same. Tim Treadless, Harvey Rodcap, Ed Trunken, Aaron Clocker, and JD McPillar still round out the top 10. Reb Meeker is 11th in points, despite having a mediocre race. James Garrison is just behind him, with Ricky Axel, Ryan Inside Laney, and Dan Garcia right behind him. Despite missing the last few races, Kevin Carvick is still in the top 20, just ahead of Maury Clutchburn in 17th. And behind them is Martin Carrix Jr., who's also missed a lot of races. Ralph Carlo and Chip Gearings round out the top 20, 16 points ahead of Jamarcus K. Cart in 21st.
Remember to press the notifications button, which goes ring, ring, ring after you press it. And lightning strikes back, and that's as if you subscribed, of course. And thank you for watching this entire video.
Jackson Storm just won 8 races in a row. Do you think he's going to break Don Chapkar's record of winning 10 races in a row back in 1985? And this is least dominant race so far since his debut, because Jackson Storm went around 150 laps without being in the lead once. And due to Todd Marcus, Lane Locke, Terry Cargus, Tommy Highbanks, and Dirksen Augustino all being fired by their teams after failing to qualify, odds are they're probably going to be replaced with next generation racers. Stay tuned for the 25th race of the 2016 Piston Cup season video, where we will learn the identity of these new racers. But in our real world, halfway across the world, unfortunately, the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine is still going on over 3 years later. The Ukrainian people just want to live in peace and have freedom. We here at the K Bullets Piston Cup YouTube channel stand with Ukraine in their struggle against Vladimir Putin's tyranny and recognize Ukraine's true borders, as shown by this map, which includes the Crimean Peninsula, all of the Donbass, and all of the Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and Kherson oblasts. Slava Ukraini! Heroyam slava! Nechai Shvitsya darotsya! Ukraini permoha! Glory to Ukraine! Glory to the heroes! May Ukraine be granted victory very soon.